my name is Adion Story. Some of you know me as Arnie at UCA. I am the assistant director of the Hyper Fitness Center at the University of Central Arkansas, where I've been been there, I guess I'm in my 11th year now. And so, yeah, this is our first little podcast / interview we're doing for you here. And if it all goes well, maybe we will, have some more in store for you down the road. If not, what they say, practice makes perfect. So either way, let's just hope that everyone takes something from it. I think that you will. And so today we have Nathan Slinkard. He is Aramark's registered dietitian at UCA, provides nutrition counseling for students, faculty, and staff on topics like disease management, healthy eating, food allergies, sports nutrition, and disordered eating. He is also on the board of directors for the Arkansas Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and is active in promoting health and wellness not only on the UCA campus but in the community. Nathan completed his bachelor's and master's in nutrition and dietetic internship at Stephen F. Austin State University. And that's Nacogdoches, right?
Yes, okay. Nacogdoches in Deep East, Texas.
Gotcha. So I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, so we have that in common. I've told you that before, but I actually drive through Nacogdoches quite a bit when I'm going back to Houston to see family there. So,
yeah.
So let's get into our topic today. So for those of you who don't know, November is Diabetes Awareness Month. So we are going to be diving into some questions with Nathan about exactly that. What is it? How do we manage it? How do we prevent it? Nutritional recommendations, etc. So before we get in, though, I want to make sure that we all keep in mind this information is just general information. And as always, you should consult with your own healthcare team to seek guidance for your own individual situation. And also know that this is going to be good. It might be good information for those trainers or coaches that are working with diabetics or who have the potential to work with people who have diabetes. As you know, according to the CDC, 1 in 10 people have diabetes, with 90 to 95% of those people suffering from type 2 diabetes. So it is a pretty common condition. So hopefully this will be good information for those trainers and coaches as well. So Nathan, obviously coming from an exercise science standpoint, there goes my lighting. So I understand that glucose is an essential component to making energy and driving our workouts. But obviously for diabetics, something has gone wrong in our physiology that leads to problems with glucose regulation. So maybe let's just start with defining for our audience what diabetes is.
Absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, type 2 diabetes is much more common, at least in the American population, making up around 90 to 95% of cases. And the good news about type 2 diabetes is that it is reversible with diet and lifestyle changes. And it is very different than type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition where our pancreas attacks our own beta cells, which produce insulin, and it's a lifelong condition, whereas, like I said, type 2 diabetes might be reversible. Type 1 diabetes, being an autoimmune condition, and it's reducing the pancreas's ability to produce insulin, that's a big deal. And if you can't produce that, or you produce too little, you'll have to take injections or get an insulin pump. So it's typically a lifelong condition that is diagnosed in children or young adults. That's not always the case, but that's most often. Type 2 diabetes is characterized by insulin resistance. So our cells, for a variety of reasons and a variety of risk factors, start to become less sensitive to insulin's function. And that leads to high blood sugars. Your pancreas, when in the early stages of the disease, typically produces a lot more insulin to hopefully deal with that as a kind of a counterbalance, which that in itself, hyperinsulinemia, is the long scientific term for that, actually poses health risks of its own. And eventually, For some with type 2 diabetes, the pancreas kind of starts to give out a little bit and produces less insulin. So sometimes type 2 diabetics have to take insulin, sometimes not. So that's a little bit about diabetes. Um, Pre-diabetes, which you may have heard of, is kind of the precursor to type 2 diabetes. And many people that have prediabetes will eventually be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And about 1 in 3 American adults have prediabetes, which is very
Right.
concerning from a public health standpoint.
What are some symptoms maybe of prediabetes? What are some things that people might look for?
So a lot of the symptoms are hard to notice because you can't necessarily tell if you have high blood sugar. But some of the symptoms you might start noticing if you have consistent high blood sugar is increased thirst, increased urination, and possibly an increased craving for sweets. And all of those occur because, like I said, with type 2 diabetes, your body becomes less you know, it becomes more resistant to insulin. And so we can't even use the sugar that is in our blood for energy, which is an interesting kind of phenomenon.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to me too that people, tend to have some misconceptions about people with diabetes. Primarily that maybe perhaps, for lack of a better term, maybe that people with diabetes end up with diabetes because they're lazy and overweight, which is probably honestly the complete opposite from my experience with knowing people who are diabetics. In fact, they seem to be kind of the opposite. They're hardworking people who just aren't making time maybe for some of those healthier decisions. Um, so, and for my dad, for example, he's diabetic, but he was one of the hardest working guys I knew, marathon runner. So, what are some of the factors that do play into an individual's risk for developing diabetes?
Well, and that's certainly the case with, certainly not the case with type 1 diabetes. There are many athletes. Jay Cutler, who used to play for the Broncos, for instance, is very vocal about his type 1 diabetes and the struggles he's had. And he's an athlete. So often those with type 1 diabetes, it's definitely not, overweight or obesity that causes that, because that's not a cause. We don't necessarily know um, exactly what causes type 1 diabetes. Autoimmune conditions are very complicated, and there's a lot we don't know about them. It seems that genetic factors in a family history will raise your risk of type 1 diabetes. Um, Possibly an environmental trigger. Some researchers think there might be something, maybe a virus that you get that might trigger that in predisposed individuals. Whereas type 2 diabetes, the risk factors, we know a lot more about them. They're much more well established. And they typically have to do with certainly family history could play a role, potentially genetics, but also a sedentary lifestyle, which many people, especially working in an office setting, is what you're kind of stuck with in a daily
Mhm.
business. You may be very hardworking, very dedicated, but due to how you're working, and if you're unable to get physical activity, that certainly raises your risk. And then if have a very busy lifestyle, it's not always easiest to make the healthiest food choices. Often you're relying on fast food or convenience food, and often those are less healthy. And so those are some of the risk factors for type 2 diabetes.
So the diabetes treatment triangle discusses the importance of medication, nutrition, and exercise. And since we're mainly highlighting the nutrition component, what are your key nutritional recommendations for people who are at higher risk for diabetes, um, or even have diabetes?
Well, one of the first things you can do is move more, have more physical activity. Whether you don't have diabetes, have prediabetes, or have diabetes, that will help increase insulin sensitivity, which is what you want. So that's one of the first things you can do. Not a nutritional thing, but very, very important health thing. Um, Also, I feel like people often go to extremes. So many people understand that carbohydrates, especially simple carbs and refined carbohydrates, do have a significant impact on blood sugar. So sometimes people will cut them out immediately and then suffer some of the side effects and consequences. Or they'll start something that's very intense, an intense exercise program, and then when it's too hard, they'll give up on it. So my nutritional recommendations would be to start with small, realistic goals, things that will be lifestyle changes that you can do for not just a week, but 5 years and 10 years. And that's following just a balanced diet. Maybe you're skipping meals, and one of the first things you can do is just eat 3 balanced meals a day with some snacks if needed. Maybe it's going to bed a little bit earlier. People don't know or don't talk about how stress and sleep impact blood sugar regulation enough. They certainly have an effect. So, a well-rounded holistic approach would be my recommendation that makes sense for the individual. It's very individualized.
Okay. And you mentioned exercise, and obviously working with directly with trainers who potentially could have clients with diabetes. I'm just kind of curious about special considerations regarding these clients, and specifically those wanting to start exercise. Again, we're talking about glucose regulation, and we know that hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia are obviously concerns with people who have diabetes. So what are some considerations that maybe trainers and coaches need to be aware of when working with diabetics?
Well, I think it really depends on the individual. Some of the things that would be common would be if you're working with a type 1 diabetic, for them to definitely check their blood sugar before a workout, especially if they're starting something new. So if they're not accustomed to how they need to adjust their insulin, how they need to adjust their diet in response to exercise, they've never done that, they really should start slow and test that out before they get more into the habit. And then with type 2 diabetics, again, they could have other underlying conditions. They could have heart disease, possibly kidney disease. So being careful with those, individuals. And also, neuropathy is sometimes present in type 2 diabetes due to prolonged hyperglycemia. So if you have a client that has any kind of nerve damage, you want to be very careful, making sure that they're checking their feet to make sure. Some diabetics will get a cut and not know about it because of neuropathy, and that can develop into a staph infection. So just
Right.
being careful and mindful for both types of diabetes.
So are there certain considerations for someone who is diabetic, who is maybe wanting to work out in the morning versus afternoon or evening that they should maybe be aware of?
Yeah, especially in the morning, just because someone has been asleep doesn't mean they wake up with lower or more normal blood glucose. They could have higher um, due to the dawn effect. And if that's the case, they want to maybe adjust how they're doing things. If they wake up with low blood sugar, whether you have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and then you work out, your blood sugar levels will fall, and that could lead to dangerously low blood sugar levels. So if someone is working out, um, no matter where they are in the day, it's obviously important to check the blood sugar. And in the morning, I would recommend some kind of meal or at least a small snack should help.
Yeah, and maybe even bringing something with them to their workouts, if just in case.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So what about myths? I kind of mentioned one before about some of these misconceptions about people with diabetes, but um, what are some of the bigger myths out there regarding diabetes that we
Yeah,
need to
so
put to rest here?
one I hear is that, and it's more misguided because it's a little more complicated, and some say that 50 to 60% of protein that you eat is converted to glucose because our liver can do hepatic gluconeogenesis where we convert amino acids to blood glucose. Just because that's possible in our bodies doesn't mean it happens. And so if you eat dietary protein and you're not in a starvation mode, in a starvation state, there's no reason to expect that much protein will be converted to glucose. Virtually none will. So that's important to know, that protein and of course fat have very little impact on blood sugar.
Okay. I just wanted to throw this one at you because I know we're getting into Thanksgiving. So just in general, not necessarily just for diabetics, but what are your favorite recommendations as far as holidays are concerned and nutritional guidance there, individuals?
Well, I would definitely say that, especially in Thanksgiving, not to skip breakfast so that way you can eat more. And I know that many of us do that because we know we're going to have a heavy meal, so might as well skip breakfast. And that's not a great idea, especially if you have a health condition. Diabetes, you want to maintain consistent blood sugar levels. And that practice would definitely harm things, not be recommended. So my recommendation would be to wake up and eat something small, which will, you'll be less tempted to eat too much. And it's okay to certainly enjoy all the wonderful foods that are provided. Just choose small amounts. And so that will, keep your blood sugars much more steady than if you just skipped breakfast or lunch and ate a whole lot later. So that would be one recommendation. And number two, I think that, food is a wonderful thing around the holidays. It's exciting because we make new things that we haven't had for a long time. But if you can make the focus more about family, and you can make the focus more about getting together, or maybe even doing some walking or something like that, taking the focus from food to other things can help with that. That way it's not just around the foods.
Yeah, that's some good advice right there. So, all right, Nathan. Well, I mean, I appreciate you definitely joining us for this interview and shedding some light on this very important topic of diabetes. And I guess before we sign off here, can you tell the audience, especially for those at the university, how they might be able to reach you and even schedule an appointment with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here year round. So any students, faculty, staff that are interested in a nutrition counseling appointment, the best way would be to go to ucadining.com. You can go to the health and wellness section and book an appointment online, or you could go to the contact us section and shoot me an email or give me a phone call.
Awesome. But y'all need to hit Nathan up. He's got some great advice. And we thank y'all for listening. We hope you took some valuable information and insight from Nathan. Make sure to take advantage of his services. And until next time, remember, health is wealth. Keep that, make that time to take care of you so you can take care of others.